And we're gonna get to Rabbi Sabato tonight. So I know Joshua studied with him.
Yeah, I bought the book.
Oh, great. Okay. All right. So let me share this sources with everybody. Can we see it?
Yes.
Okay. So I titled today's class Yaakov's dreams, and we'll get to his dreams. But before that, there's an interesting Rashi. I wanted to spend some time unpacking that Rashi and the idea behind Rashi, and then we'll get to the dreams. So Parshat Vayetze discusses, of course, the Yetziah, the Yaakov's leaving from his parents' home. At the end of last week's parsha, we saw in last week's shir that after Yaakov tricked Yitzchak to give him the blessing, the Bechorah, that Esav makes a promise that he's going to kill Yaakov, or once his parents die, he'll kill Yaakov. And so his parents send him away to safety to his uncle Lavan's house. Hi, Robert and Rena.
Hi.
And part of that is in hope that he'll find a wife, and part of that is that he'll be protected from Esav. So on his way, of course, he has the dream with the ladder and the angels ascending and descending. We're not going to focus on the dream right now, but right after the dream, we're going to pick up even after that. So after he has the dream, he continues on his way to Haran, where his uncle lives, and we pick up in chapter 29. Everyone see, I'll try to get the English displayed as well. Vayisa Yaakov raglav vayelech artza b'nei kedem. So he goes towards the east. Vayar v'hinei be'er basadeh. V'hinei sham shlosha edrei tzon rovtzim aleha. Kimin habe'er hahi yashku adorim va'even hagedola al pi habe'er. He comes upon a well, and he sees that all the shepherds are gathered because there's a large rock on top of it. Commentators, right? V'ne'esfu shama kol ejarim v'galu et ha'even me'al pi habe'er. Yishku et hatzon v'yishivu et ha'even al pi habe'er limkoma. They would all the shepherds together would have to roll the stone, this big rock, off of the well, so they could give water to their sheep, and then they would cover it up again, and that was their insurance that no one would, presumably no one would steal water when it wasn't the proper time. They could keep tabs, make sure everyone was only taking the water that was due to them. Vayomer lahem Yaakov, achai me'ayin atem, vayomer mecharan anachu. So Yaakov sees them, he asks them, where are you from? They say, we're from Haran. He asks them if they know his uncle Lavan. They say, we know him. So he asks, how is he? They say, he's fine. And but look, there's his daughter Rachel coming with the sheep. So Yaakov says to them, it's the middle of the day. Why are you all gathered here? Give your sheep water and go back to letting them pasture. They say we can't until everyone gathers and rolls this big rock off together. So they're still talking. Rachel comes with the sheep. Yaakov et Rachel bat Lavan achi imo v'etatzon Lavan achi imo v'yigash Yaakov v'yagal et ha'even me'al pi ha'be'er v'yash ketatzon Lavan achi imo. And when Yaakov sees Rachel, his cousin, the daughter of his uncle, and their sheep, and he goes and he himself rolls the stone off of the well, and he gives water to the sheep. Vayishak Yaakov leRachel. This is the pasuk we're going to focus on, the Rashi. Yaakov kisses her, and he lifts his voice and he cries. He tells her that he's her cousin, the son of Rachel, and she goes and she tells her father, Vayiki Shmor Lavan et Shema Yaakov ben Achoto, Vayaratz likarto, Vayechabek lo, Vayinashek lo, Vayavieh lo beito, Vayisaper lo Lavan et kol advarim ha'eleh. Lavan hears this, he runs out, he greets Yaakov, and he hugs him, and he kisses him, and he brings him to the home, and Yaakov tells him all that had happened. Okay, so Vayisa, when Yaakov sees Rachel, what's his reaction? First, he seems to take on Superman strength, and then he kisses her, Vayisad kolo vayef, and he raises his voice, and he cries. Why does Yaakov cry? What prompts the crying of Yaakov? Any thoughts? So some say it's like a romantic moment that he's like overcome with emotions.
Why not?
that he
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, Arthur agrees that it's he's overcome with love and with emotions, and that he's crying because he's falling in love with her already.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Why not? So why do you think he's crying?
He's been in a very emotionally fraught place.
Mm-hmm.
He had this terrible falling out with his brother, his twin, who's tried to kill him. He's deceived his father, and he by nature is not a deceitful person. He's had to run for his life. He had to sleep on rocks, and he's finally come to some sanctuary, and maybe he's crying out of relief.
Okay.
Like, okay, it's going to be all right now, because it hasn't been all right for a while.
Or maybe he's only now able to process what happened.
Yeah.
He was so caught up in the flight reaction that he only now that he's gotten to his destination can he say, "Oh my gosh, this is really quite a dramatic thing that happened to me."
And he also has found the family he was looking for, which could have taken him days to find where he was going.
It might, putting aside any romance or love, it's just relief that he made it where he's supposed to be. So I think these are all valid explanations, and Rashi though points us in a very different way. Or look at Rashi, then we'll go back to see some of the other textual basis for this comment of Rashi. Rashi gives us two possible explanations for Yaakov's crying. Sorry, I had the wrong Rashi pulled up. You want number 5. Vayef, he cried. Lefi shetzafa beruach hakodesh, she'ena nichneset imo likvura. So the first explanation Rashi gives us is that Yaakov sees with prophecy or divine spirit, however we want to understand Ruach HaKodesh, that Rachel is not going to be buried with him. Right? We have to fast forward to many, many years in the future when Rachel dies giving birth to Binyamin, right? And she is buried in Beit Lechem in Kever Rachel. Yaakov explains this to his children later on, that she died on the road. He was not able to bury her in the Marat HaMachpelah. So Rashi plays very much with Arthur's understanding of the crying, that Yaakov was already overcome with love for Rachel. He was so smitten, and he was already distraught because he sensed that they were not going to be together forever. They might get married, but they're not going to be buried next to each other. So that's the first explanation Rashi gives for why Yaakov cries. We're not going to spend much more time on this explanation, but curious if anyone has any thoughts or reactions to this interpretation of Rashi for Yaakov's crying. Do people accept this? Convinced? Not convinced? Rena's not convinced.
It sounds like a made-up reason.
Sounds like a made-up reason. Okay. So it's interesting when we have these Rashis, and he's quoting from the Midrash, when we have these seemingly made-up reasons, right? What prompts making up the reason?
Right? That's the question.
Right.
In other words, the question is often better than the answer.
Right. So so we're not going to focus on this piece of it, but if you'll remember, a couple weeks ago we I introduced Rabbi Foreman's really excellent book on the Parsha. He has podcasts also that are quite good. So he has Baltimore connections, Rabbi Foreman. So this week's Parsha, he prompts it with the question is, do we know if Yaakov ever is vindicated or is ever punished for lying and tricking his father, right? So based on that question, he offers an interesting take on this first explanation of Rashi. Again, we're not going to focus on this today, but I think that it does seem a little bit like a far stretch from the Pshat, and so we have to wonder what's prompting Rashi to offer such a far-fetched explanation when there's probably more plausible, more reasonable explanations. Davar acher. So now the second explanation of Rashi. Lefi sheba biyadayim reikaniot. Since he came empty-handed. He's crying because he has nothing to give her. Right? So again, most understand that this is tied into the romantic approach that Arthur is, I think, still advocating for. That his tears are tears of love, and that he's smitten with Rachel, and he wants to be able to give her a gift. He wants to be able to give her something to show how overcome he is by her, and he doesn't have anything. Okay, so we'll come back to this Rashi and see what the backstory that he gives us, but first let's just look at some of the textual support for this, right? How do we know that Yaakov has nothing? Right, and it's very interesting. Right, on the one hand, we could say, well, he has nothing because he was running away. His life was in danger, but we knew he wasn't quite in danger because Esav said he wasn't going to do anything to Yaakov as long as his parents are living. So Yaakov could have gotten things in order, perhaps, right? If his parents are sending him off to get married, it's not unreasonable to think they would have given him money for a dowry. They would have given him something to present himself, to support himself. But it's also not crazy to think that he's running away and he might not have had anything with him. Right, so there's actually a very interesting approach of the Ibn Ezra. The Ibn Ezra, if you remember last week, we focused a bit on Esav and why he was so willing to depart and sell his Bechorah, sell the birthright. So the Ibn Ezra says that Esav was willing to depart with the birthright because there was nothing worth inheriting. That Yitzchak had become impoverished. That, whatever he inherited from Abraham, whatever riches he had amassed in his life, he had lost. And at the time when Yaakov asks Esav to sell the Bechorah to him, Yitzchak was poor. He had no money to give his children. So Esav was so willing to depart with the birthright because he figured there's nothing to inherit. There's nothing here. And so that ties in perhaps, right? Some say, use this Ibn Ezra to support the fact that Yaakov had no money, he had no riches when he comes to Rachel because his family was poor. Maybe they were rich at one point, but at this stage in the family history, they don't have anything. Very interesting. Right, but we do see that the Torah seems to support this claim that Yaakov came empty-handed. How do we know this? Immediately after the dream that he has where he sees the angels ascending and descending the ladder, and God speaks to him and makes promises to him, the reaction back in source number 2 on the first page is Vayashkem Yaakov baboker, vayikach et ha'even asher samet me'ashotav, v'yasem oto matziva, vaytzok shemen al rosha. He wakes up in the morning, he takes the stone he had slept upon, he pours oil on it, vayikra et shem ha'makom hahu Beit El, v'lamuz shem ha'ir l'rishona. He calls this place Beit El, it had previously been called Luz. Vayidor Yaakov neder lemor, and Yaakov makes a vow, saying, Im yeh Elokim imadi, ushmarani baderech hazer asher anochi olech. If God is with me and protects me on this journey that I'm on, v'natan li lechem le'echol u'beged le'obosh, and gives me food to eat, bread to eat, and clothing to wear, v'shafti b'shalom el beit avi, and I return peacefully to my father's home, v'yah Hashem li le'elokim, then Hashem will be my God. And this stone will be a testament to this vow, to this promise that I'm making, right? So Yaakov says, that part of the kindness, part of the promise that God is going to have to do for him is provide food and clothing, which implies that he had nothing, right? So another textual allusion to this idea is what the first set of verses that we saw. When Yaakov comes to Haran, he meets Rachel. Rachel then goes and tells her father that the nephew, the cousin Yaakov, is here. What does Lavan do? He runs out to greet Yaakov. He hugs him and he kisses him and he brings him to the house. Rashi there says, why does Lavan hug and kiss Yaakov?
He's frisking him.
He's frisking him, right? I'm just trying to pull up the Rashi number 4. Kasavur mamon hutaun. He thinks that Yaakov must have money with him. Why would he think that? Shaharei eved habayit balakan basalag malim teunim. There was another representative of that side of the family who came to Haran in search of a wife, and he came loaded with camels and jewelry and all sorts of stuff, right? When Eliezer came and to find a wife for Yitzchak. So Lavan assumes that Yaakov must have also come with similar possessions. Vayechabek, so why does he hug Yaakov? Kishelo ra'a imo klum. Amar shema zehuvim hevi v'hinam b'cheiko. He doesn't have lots of camels. He doesn't have lots of obvious riches with him. Maybe he has fine, precious jewels and stones that he's holding more closely to his chest. So that's why he hugs him. Vayanashiklo, he kisses him. Amar shema marglioti v'heim b'fiv. Maybe he's hiding the jewels in his mouth. Right, so Lavan is looking for riches. He doesn't have. There are no riches to find, because Yaakov was running for his life. And so now we could go back to the Rashi, and Rashi gives us, right, when we have, as Moshe said, we have to ask why. Why, when there's a more simple answer, does Rashi bring more complicated explanations? So here's the explanation Rashi has for why Yaakov has no money and no riches with him. Back to number 5. He was crying because he was empty-handed. Amar Eliezer Eved Avi Abba Hayu Biyadav Nizamim Utzmidim Umigdanot Mani Ein Biyadi Klum. When Eliezer came looking for a wife, he had lots of riches and lots of wealth. I have nothing. Why does Yaakov have nothing? Lefi Sheradaf Eliphaz ben Esav b'mitzvat aviv acharav lahargo v'hisigo. What happens when Yaakov was running away from Esav? Esav had made a promise, I'm not going to lay hands on Yaakov as long as my parents are alive. So what did Esav do? He sends his son to kill Yaakov. He sends his son Eliphaz. And Eliphaz catches up to Yaakov and is about to kill him. But Lefisha Gadal Eliphaz b'cheiko shel Yitzchak mashach yadav. Eliphaz had been positively influenced by his grandfather Yitzchak. And so he wasn't so quick to kill Yaakov, right? Maybe this also implies that he grew up with close associations with Yitzchak's home. He had a relationship with Yaakov also. But anyway, the connection with Yitzchak prevented him from immediately killing Yaakov. What did he do? He pulled his hands back. Amar lo ba'aseh, but he has a difficulty because, right, he has to honor the wish of his father. His father sent him on a mission to kill Yaakov. So he presents his dilemma to Yaakov. Yaakov, I don't want to kill you. I know killing is wrong, but I made a promise to my father that I'm going to kill you. So help me get out of it. Put on your good Gemara cup and let's figure this out. Amarlo Yaakov told Masha Biadi. So Yaakov says, take all the riches, take everything that I have in my possession. Why and how will that help? He'ani chashuv kemet. The poor, someone who's poor without any riches, is considered as if they're dead, based on the Gemara Nidarim. So Yaakov says, you can report back to your father that Yaakov is dead, right? Not physically dead, but that he is dead. He doesn't have, because we have this principle that the dead is like, the poor is like the dead. Very interesting story. right? So what do we make of this? Is this the most plausible explanation for why Yaakov has no money, why he comes empty-handed to Rachel? Obviously not. So why?
And is it plausible that Esav, when he said he wouldn't kill Yaakov as long as their father was alive, that then he would send his son out to kill him?
Right.
Maybe.
On his instruction?
Yeah.
Maybe.
It's possible, right? Technically, he's not lying. Technically, he's keeping his word. But this seems like a very far-fetched way of seeming what we've come up with much more reasonable explanations for Yaakov's not having anything. So why does Rashi bring this story to explain Yaakov's empty-handedness?
But remember, this all goes back. The original problem is, why did he cry? That's the original problem.
Right. The original problem is, why did he cry? So we're accepting, or we're trying to unpack Rashi's explanation that he was crying because he came empty-handed. He had nothing to give her. And now we want to know why this is the explanation offered for his being empty-handed, for his having nothing. So before we get into the Eliphaz story, I just wanted to jump forward a little bit to this notion Ani chashuv kamet, that the poor is considered like the dead. So I'm sure we could spend a lot of time trying to unpack and make sense of that statement from the Gemara. I just wanted to bring what Rabbi Foreman suggests about that, and that's in the footnote number 4 to his essay on this week's Parsha. When Jacob tells Eliphaz that a poor person is considered the same as a dead person, he seems to be suggesting that the poor and the dead are alike, are at the mercy of others. Just as a dead person has interest in the world he leaves behind, but no power to see to those interests, the destitute person is virtually powerless to achieve his aims in this world. Little does Jacob know when he reasons along these lines with Eliphaz that he soon is to taste the bitter fruits of his powerlessness in his own interactions with Laban. We'll get there in a second. Okay, so why is the poor person considered like a dead person? Because a poor person lacks agency in this world, just as the dead lack agency in this world. Right, and that we ties into why we say Kaddish for the deceased, why we do mitzvot in their honor and their memory, Le'ilui Nishmas, to try to elevate the soul, right? Because they're not able to do anything on their own. So that's one explanation for this Talmudic principle. Any other thoughts on why the Gemara would make that assertion? How a poor and is similar to being dead?
He's not poor if he has family. If he's got, Yaakov's not poor if he has family who consider him family. He's got assets in that way.
Okay, so we could argue, right? We could argue with the contention that wealth is defined, or richness is defined by wealth. Right? That Pirkei Avot tells us that wealth is defined by being content with your lot, with your portion. So yeah, we could go that route, Robert, and discuss questions.
It's not being Yaakov being satisfied with what he has or doesn't have. He has managed to alienate his twin.
Uh-huh.
He's managed to alienate his father. He's managed to disappoint his potential father-in-law. Presumably, Rivka is going to be, Rachel is going to have a problem with a suitor who doesn't have the wherewithal to establish a family. The property needed, the animals, and so on and so on.
Uh-huh.
So he's put himself into a position where he's harmed his own interest.
Okay.
If he actually had to give all of his wealth to Eliphaz and he couldn't figure out a way to give him, let's say, half of the wealth.
No, but
he's been tricking people otherwise, so why not trick somebody who's trying to kill him?
Okay. Interesting.
Especially a relative, there's a discount there.
Is there any problem at all in having the patriarchs quote the Babylonian Talmud?
Is there a problem? Not for the Talmud, there's not. Not for the Talmud in the Midrashic literature. It assumes that, I guess there's a few different ways we could explain how the rabbis in the Talmud make sense of this, right? Either that the Talmud is, when it was written down, published in 3rd, 4th, 5th century, that it was, just writing down what were universal truths, or what were oral truths that had been passed down, and perhaps that had been in existence since the creation of the world, right? That God used the Torah as the blueprint for creating the world, and Torah certainly means the written and the oral law. Historically, it's very problematic because obviously Yaakov lived centuries before the Talmud was written, but it's not problematic from the perspective of the rabbis or the Midrashic literature. Right? Phenomenology is just one of the assumptions that is made in looking at Midrashim and Talmudic literature, and so it's an interesting question, right? And it plays into the question about did the Avot and Imahot, did the patriarchs observe the Torah, right? How do we make sense of the fact that there seems to be an assumption that they did keep the Torah, and yet there's many blatant violations, right? This week's
including
Parsha,
Yaakov kissing
including
Rachel.
Yaakov kissing Rachel. Well, kissing Rachel already, you have to get into
Embracing and kissing her.
right. So only for the Rambam is that a Torah problem, right? But marrying two sisters is a problem for everyone. So it's a very rich question. Maybe we can find occasion to unpack some of those sources. So the short answer, Gary, is historically, yes, it's very problematic for Yaakov to quote the Gemara, but for the assumptions and worldview of Gemara and rabbinic literature, there's no problem whatsoever. It's a given that these were known to the patriarchs one way or another.
See, another way to put it, Gary, is that the rabbis assume, and even nowadays assume, that it's a mutual conversation across hundreds and thousands of years. That you can talk to them and they can talk back and you can talk back. I mean, it's suspension of it's a different kind of historical view.
Right. So
it's a collapsing of time.
There's a collapsing of time. It's a great question. I'll find time to tie this question into one of our Parsha studies, so we can unpack some of those sources and try to delve a bit deeper. But it's a great question, Gary, and it's a very, as Moshe and many else said, it's the question often is better than the answers. So we're not going to spend any more time with that right now. We're going to have to accept it as a given that Yaakov knew this principle, whether he knew it from studying Gemara and Nedarim, right? Maybe there's Midrash that says he had spent time in yeshiva before going to Haran, that it was a more long, but whatever, he knew it. So why does Rashi bring this Eliphaz story to explain Yaakov's poverty? Before we see what Rabbi Foreman has to say, does anyone have any thoughts on that? All right, so Rabbi Foreman takes it in the following way. He says that, what is it, if we fast forward in Yaakov's life, what becomes the defining moment, the defining obstacle in his having any shalom and in his having any peace while with Lavan? And it's obviously the fact that he is so smitten with Rachel and that it becomes a drawn out thing, right? He has to work. He works 7 years. He finally earns his right to marry her. The sisters are switched under the chuppah. He works another 7 years. There's all the drama that ensues because of the big home with the many wives and the many children, right? So he says, why? Why does Yaakov have all these troubles? Why does Yaakov have such a hard, why does it become such an obstacle for him? And the reason it becomes an obstacle for him is because he had no money, right? If he came to Lavan's house with money, if he came with the riches that Eliezer had come in search of a wife for Yitzchak, then there would be no drama for Yaakov. He would have said, I think your daughter's beautiful. I would like to marry her. Here's 10 camels. Here's 20 gold earrings, whatever. And life would have been great for Yaakov. He would have had the wife that he wanted. He would have had safety from Esav, and everything would have been good. So why was Lavan able to take advantage of Jacob so thoroughly? That's what the rabbis are getting at in this Eliphaz story. Lavan was able to take advantage of Jacob because when Jacob met Rachel, he had come with empty hands. To see what the rabbis mean, just consider the alternative. What if he had come to meet Rachel what if he had not come with empty hands? What if, like Eliezer, he had come with great wealth? He would have been able to dazzle the damsel's family just as Eliezer had done. Of course, Lavan made no attempt to beguile Eliezer or play games with him. Eliezer's copious wealth had given Lavan the sense that Eliezer was a man of substance and was not to be trifled with. The same could have been true, the sages are saying, should have been true for Jacob. But something went wrong. He lost his money on the way. And when he did meet Lavan, all the penniless Jacob had to give for Rachel was his own hard labor. Lavan regarded him as a pauper and took advantage of him. Jacob lost Rachel for those 7 years, the sages are saying, because he came to Lavan empty-handed. Okay, so the poverty, the empty-handedness, becomes the essential detail that allows the next 20 years of narrative in Yaakov's life to unfold in the way that it unfolds. It still doesn't quite, he doesn't quite get at why specifically this Eliphaz story, but that Yaakov coming poor is a crucial detail, right? And I think part of it is that he didn't set out with this in mind, right? He set out with a very different mindset. He set out that things were going to be peaceful once he gets to Lavan's house. He set out with plenty of money, and on the way down, he lost the money, right? So the explanations that, well, he was running for his life, he didn't have time to gather anything, or Yitzchak had become impoverished, that wouldn't work for this, because part of the drama is the sudden change in plans that Yaakov was confronted with, because he had expected things to be one way, and he became impoverished on his way to Lavan's house, and that's what led to him. Having things happen as they did, right?
So what is it?
Go ahead.
Yeah, just what does this teach us about how Chazal look at Rabbi Akiva before he becomes Rabbi Akiva? He shows up. He's a shepherd. He's poor. He has nothing other than the sheep that belong to whoever is employing him, and he's interested in the daughter of a very wealthy man. The father of the woman he's interested in doesn't like this match.
Right.
Absolutely not.
Right.
And so does Rabbi Akiva become wealthy? He acquires the richness of Torah. So Yaakov presumably had been studying in the yeshivos of Shem and Aver and whoever. Shouldn't he have been given credit for acquiring that learning, just as Rabbi Akiva ends up getting credit, quote unquote, so that he can marry, although 20 years, 40 years, whatever the count is, there's also a delay there. Right. So in one case, that it's a sign of praise, and the other is criticism
yeah.
of Yaakov.
It's I mean, is there one accepted view on wealth and money in the Talmud? No, there's, some of the great sages of the Talmud were quite wealthy and some were quite poor. So yeah, I mean, the Rebbe Akiva is an interesting story to contrast because he also, as you know, he begins very poor and he goes in wealth also. But I wanted to just, I see it's already getting a little late, because the next step Rabbi Foreman does is this is the genius. This is why I love reading what he has to say and listening to him. He says that what was the key phrase that turned us on to this whole incident is Yaakov cried, right? We have a similar expression. He's not the only person to cry in the Torah. Rabbi Foreman notes that when this whole drama began, and Yaakov steals the blessing from Esav and tricks Yitzchak, what is Esav's reaction? Esav's reaction is,
he cries too.
Vayomer Esav el Aviv, Habracha achat hi lecha avi, barcheni gam ani avi. He says, do you only have one blessing? Can't you find another blessing to give me? Vayisa Esav kolo vaye. Esav raises his voice and he cries. Right? So it's so interesting. We have Yaakov crying when he sees Rachel for the first time. And the previous time that we saw someone crying was Esav. And Esav's crying is what led Yaakov to have to run away and begin this whole journey, which ended in him meeting Rachel. So Rabbi Foreman says on this, it's as if the rabbis are saying to us, you want to understand why when Jacob met Rachel, he lifted up his voice and cried? Just look at the last time someone lifted up his voice and cried. For Esav had cried that very same way when his brother Yaakov deceived him. Esav experienced that terrible sinking feeling that something precious was slipping through his fingers. The blessing his father had intended for him now would be lost forever on him, taken with guile by Yaakov. Recognizing that bitter reality, Esav had cried. Why is it that Jacob ends up crying hopelessly when he meets Rachel? The sages conclude that Esav's tears led through a natural train of consequences to Yaakov's. In other words, the sages' story of the encounter with Eliphaz is just their way of reconstructing that train of consequences. That there's something fundamental, right? There's something essential about the tears of Esav and the tears of Yaakov that are what's going on in this story, that are the key underlying thing, right? That this family drama and this sense of hopelessness, this sense of despair that Esav feels as he loses the Bechorah, he loses the blessing that should have been his, the sense of despair that Yaakov feels as he sees Rachel, knows he wants to marry Rachel, and has that sinking feeling that he's unable to, or that sinking feeling that he's not going to be with her forever, that they're going to be separated by death, not buried together, right? It's that same feeling. And it's just a beautiful connection. I don't know exactly, I think we could probably tease out a lot of different lessons from it, but I just love seeing that connection and thinking about how the chain of events are unfolding, that everything is quite intentional, quite deliberate, and that there is, that Eliphaz has to play a role in being the cause of Yaakov's tears, just makes it even stronger and more impactful.
See, it's completely, there are two parallels here.
Mm-hmm.
Esav comes to Yaakov. Esav is starving. He's needy. He needs to eat. Yaakov takes advantage of him, okay? And then deceives his father deliberately as to his identity. Yaakov shows up at Lavan's needy. Mm-hmm. He needs food and water. He just said, if God, you'll give me food, food to eat. What are you needy? He knows he's dependent. He gets taken advantage of by Lavan with a case of assumed identity. It's a complete parallelism. The thing about the cry is just sort of a marker that these two stories are really the same. They're the same story. Yaakov is getting treated the way he acted.
The way that he treated his father, yeah.
The way he treated his brother and his father.
And his father, right, right. Yeah, so I was very intrigued and excited by that textual connection that's, you know, you look at the Rashi, it seems completely crazy. Why is he giving us the story of Eliphaz? Where's this coming from? But to see that it's in order to bring us back and focus on what Yaakov had done previously and the previous crying that we saw of Esav, I think was very powerful. But I actually want to come back to conclude with something that Robert had alluded to, which is, why are we defining Yaakov's wealth or his richness by his wealth, right? By money, right? So yes, maybe he comes empty-handed. He doesn't have any jewels. He doesn't have many camels. He doesn't have great riches to offer, but he does come with something else. And this is where Rabbi Sabato, who is now the Rosh Yeshiva at Ma'ale Adumim, Shiva Birkat Moshe in Israel, and who is a beautiful, powerful writer. He writes novels. He writes history, Aleppo tales of his family's heritage growing up, and has a book on the Parsha, probably more than one book on the Parsha. So he writes very powerfully that I'll just read it, because even in the English translation, I think it's beautiful. With only a staff in his hand and a stone on which to rest his head, he asks for nothing but bread to eat and clothes to wear, and to return in peace to his father's home. Nevertheless, Jacob does not begin his long path to exile empty-handed. He dreams a dream, his journey with the dream in mind, and it lightens his step. It is a wonderful dream. The ladder was seated earthward, and its top reached heavenward. And behold, angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Right? So Rabbi Sabato was saying that even though Yaakov has no material wealth, right, as he's on this journey to escape his brother, to find a wife, to begin to build his own family, his own destiny, that he does carry something with him very, very precious.
Yes.
What is it that he carries with him? It's the dream that God gave him, right? And there's lots of very rich symbolism about the dream. What do the angels represent, going up and going down, right? The Rashi quotes the Midrash about where is exactly is this ladder extended over? Is it over Jerusalem? Is it over Beersheba? Right? There's lots of rich symbolism, but the point is that Yaakov carries with him this dream. And Rabbi Sabato uses this to show that what Yaakov was doing was teaching us the secret of how to survive in exile. That to be in diaspora means we're going to be poor, we might be impoverished, but so long as we're able to carry with us the dream and the vision of something greater and something magnificent at the end, that can carry us through the difficult circumstances that we might face in life. And the Sfat Emet alludes to this, and when he writes that Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva, Yaakov leaves Beersheva, V'vadai haya yetzia zu hachana ve'etza al hagalut shenuchal l'taken atzmeinu gam b'chutz la'aretz. Yaakov's leaving Beersheva and going to Haran, leaving the land of Israel, is certainly for us a preparation and counsel that we can improve ourselves and correct ourselves and live with ourselves when we're in the diaspora. Yaakov Avinu alav hashalom hichnis atzmo beratzon b'makom shenistar v'ne'elam kevod Hashem mamshich gam shama kevod shemo. Yaakov deliberately and willingly put himself in a place devoid of God's presence in order to draw God's presence there. Yaakov subjected himself to living in diaspora, to living in exile. It was a temporary diaspora. He ultimately returned to Eretz Yisrael, but that he opened himself up to that vulnerability, the Sfat Emet says, in order to teach us that we can also thrive and succeed in our own exile, in our own diaspora experience, right? And Rabbi Sabato adds, carried by the dreams, by the visions that we have. Despite whatever our socioeconomic reality might be, whatever the political reality might be, whatever the circumstances of life might be, if we're able to have that dream, to have that vision of something great, and the assurance that God is with us as we're in our diaspora existence, as we're in our exile, so that can carry us very far. And that's the secret of Yaakov's dream, Rabbi Sabato says. That's despite the empty-handedness, despite the poverty that he comes to Lavan's house, that he meets Rachel with, which leads him to tears, which brings him to cry, to realize how bad a situation it is, right? All is not lost, because Yaakov was bolstered by the vision, by the dream that God had given him, and that's what carried him forward. So I thought it was a beautiful connection. You know, it's not exactly this step leads to this step, but we see Yaakov's poverty, we see his lack of wealth, his lack of riches. But we have to contrast that with the richness that he had in other areas of his life, hopefully. And the ultimate message is, yes, there is some truth, right? It's not easy to be poor, but as Robert correctly pointed out, that depends on how we define poverty. And if we're able to see ourselves as being rich, even if we don't have big bank accounts. So that's one of the secrets, perhaps, that Yaakov gives us. Any final reactions or thoughts to this?
Well, when Robert said Jacob was poor in material goods but rich in Torah, it struck me that that's not the kind of riches that's going to impress a character like Lavan.
Right. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Right, and for us, being rich in Torah is not going to impress the neighbors necessarily. Well,
yeah.
Pikesville might impress the neighbors, but
Could I just add one other thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say it's like a validation for Yaakov of Hashem speaking to him when, as Kael Shakai, that he would make the promises that I gave to your father and your grandfather. I'm giving them to you. But the first thing he says, I'm with you. I'm with you. And that's what you just brought up. But also, what would impress and did impress Lavan was the way Eliezer told his story was in order to, I think, really subtly, but maybe not so subtly imply, this is God's doing, and you better not mess with me. So he's saying, God is with me also.
Interesting.
So Lavan, if after a while, he finally realizes with all of the sheep and then there's the goats and then there's this and then there's that, he has a conversation with God finally at the end of that story, just before they meet at the stones and the oath that they make together. Lavan finally has to admit that Yaakov does have God with him.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Anne. That's a beautiful thought.
Nice.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The text doesn't say exactly how old Yaakov is when he has to embark on this journey. Can we extrapolate that information to figure out kind of how old he was? Was he 20s, 30s, 40s?
We can. I don't have the math in my head right now.
Sure we can. It's easy to do.
Well, Shabbos.
Yeah, we can. We definitely can. I think I want to say it was about 20. But I'll have to. I'll confirm that. I'll confirm that.
But Eliphaz is Esav's son.
Yeah.
And Esav didn't marry till he was 40, right? Or he married the second time when he was 40?
He married a second time. Right?
Oh, okay. So yeah.
Yeah. So I'll figure it. I'll get it to my shop.
Yeah, it's in the Rashi, and and Yaakov was 40 already, at least.
He was 40. Okay.
At least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's in the Rashi.
All right. Anyone else? If not, we'll say Lila Tov.
Laila Tov. Thank you so
Laila
much,
Tov.
Rabbi Kaplan.
Laila Tov, Shkoa.
Laila Tov.
Yes. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Laila
Happy
Tov.
Thanksgiving.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Mhm.
Please.